Howdy, folks. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day. Russ, we're going to get started with the pre-show real quick. No preamble for me. Start us off with the pre-show.
All right. So on this day in 1977 was one of the worst days in my life. That's when Tom Seaver got traded to the Cincinnati Reds. I literally woke up. I was 14 years old, super into baseball. He was my favorite player. I woke up, and all of a sudden he was not on the Mets. And I was like, just crushed. Like, that was the first time I realized anybody could be traded. I knew of trades, right? You saw the baseball cards that had the traded things. Like, we'd seen them. But this was a guy that meant everything to the team and the franchise and won him a championship. And so I was in this delusion that he might actually play there his whole career. And it just was crushing. Now, the guys they got in return is insignificant, although Pat Zachary was a pretty good pitcher. I'm Facebook friends with him. And the funny thing about Pat Zachary is in that year that the Mets got him, he got frustrated after a game and he kicked the water fountain and broke his toe. And that didn't help because everybody was looking for at least Zachary to be something after Tom Seaver. That didn't help the first year. But
it was Doug Flynn, right? Doug Flynn,
Steve Henderson, somebody else too. It doesn't matter. Pat Zachary.
Yeah.
Horrible. By the way, it was Jody McDonald's dad. And Jody McDonald knows about it, and he can't feel good about it because Jody McDonald's dad was the GM of the Mets at the time.
Kev, is there any example in your sporting fandom that is close to that?
Yeah, I was trying to come up with that. Nothing off the top of my head.
Because K-Line didn't get traded.
No, K-Line didn't get traded, and Willie did, but I was older then. Willie Horton did. Nothing comes to mind. Let me think about it though for a second.
Anthony, anybody in Philadelphia that?
Because my sports fandom started probably when I was. Russ was even younger than me, but I was probably maybe around 10, 11 years old, and I really started getting into sports. So for me, Dave Poulin getting traded for Ken Linsman. Dave Poulin was my first hockey hero. He really was. And seeing him get traded was like, and I am older now understanding why that happened, sure. But as a as a kid who idolized Dave Poulin as a kid, it was devastating.
In terms of my Buffalo fandom, O.J. Simpson being traded to San Francisco back in 1979, I believe, and it was a big deal. The big Sabres Red Wings deal in '81, Foligno, McCourt, Danny Gare. That was a lot of the players that were really good Sabres in the late 70s. But I'd say obviously the Wendell Clark trade to Quebec for Matt Sundin in '94. That ripped the heart out of every Leafs fan because they loved Wendell.
You still hold a grudge, like you.
I don't
like Matt Sundin, no matter what Matt Sundin did.
No, Russ. If I differentiate between being a fan and being a general manager, the trade made sense because Clark had back problems for 4 years in a row, and Sundin was, I think, 22 years old, a former first overall pick, and he was the centerpiece of that team for the next over a decade. It's just they traded Wendell, and Wendell had come off a season where he almost scored 50 goals, and he led them to 2 conference finals. And they were never, that team was never the same. They ended up trading Gilmore a couple of years ago. So, it really, and they ended up getting Clark back a couple times, but it was never the same because that Wendell Clark was gone, and
how does Mike the fan feel all these years later?
What's that?
How does Mike the fan feel all these years later?
I'm not a fan anymore. I can't
How
tell
did
you.
Mike the fan feel at the time, and even
I thought it was. I thought it was an atrocity. I hated it. I thought I couldn't conceive of anything that you would force me for that organization to trade Wendell Clark because he was.
Could Matt Sundin have done anything to redeem himself in your heart for Wendell Clark?
He did a lot of stuff. It was just at the end of his tenure in Toronto, Russ, when he waived his fail to waive his no trade clause. I think a lot of Leaf fans were like, "Screw this guy," because he, that showed how much he appreciated being paid $10 million or $9 million a year. They asked him to waive his no move clause to go someplace for 2 months, and he said no.
Who scored more goals as a Leaf, Matt Sundin or Wendell Clark?
Matt Sundin scored the most goals as a Leaf, Russ. I know that. Did he win anything? No. Anyway,
that Gear trade, by the way, was one of the biggest trades in Detroit history because it was so shocking. I mean, Dale McCourt and Mike Foligno were young players on their way up, and to have that kind of move made. Danny Gear was still playing at a high level, and was a contributor, but it was a pretty stunning trade. Like it was real water cooler type discussions. After that
year, I remember Foligno had 40 goals. Like he was.
Yeah, no, I mean it was good. I mean there were a lot of big time players involved in that deal, and we all went to a game on New Year's Eve. Derek Smith was involved in that trade too, and I remember a drunken New Year's Eve where a bunch of us burned Derek Smith's trading card in effigy. So. It was a crazy thing. So, but anyway.
But you wouldn't have burnt the Bobby Orr one. You knew Derek Smith's card wasn't worth that much.
Well, I mean, it was just kind of a joke about that trade stuff. It really had nothing to do with Derek Smith. But anyway, I would say this though, it made me think of it. Gordie Howe's decision to come back and play, but not with the Red Wings. Was tough on a lot of Detroiters.
Yeah,
I bet.
Yeah, so I mean, I was older then, so I mean, I understood it. I was pretty pragmatic when it came to sports, and but still, I mean, it was disheartening to see him play in Hartford when he came back to the NHL. I mean, he scored 16 goals, I guess, at age 52. I think that's right, 15 or 16 anyway. Mm-hmm. But just the fact he didn't do it with the Red Wings when he was a Red Wing. There's no doubt about it. So.
The weird thing, just one last thing before that about that trade, Kev, is the fact that it was Derek. They said Derek Smith, Jim Schoenfeld, Danny Gear, and Bob Sauvé for Brent Peterson, Dale McCourt, and Mike Foligno. Sauvé played the rest of the year at the Red Wings and then ended up going back to the Sabres. And this was before like unrestricted. Nobody ever knew what the deal was, whether that was just like they loaned him to Detroit and then he went back to Buffalo. But it was really strange what nobody understood what happened with Sauvé, because Sauvé ended up back in Buffalo the next year and their starter. So it was like he was lent to Detroit and then he went back.
One thing. I don't know anybody. I can't remember anyone else who was like this. But Dale McCourt's claim to fame was he never celebrated a goal. He never. You might see a little raise of the stick, but even that, he didn't even do that. And it was all about what his dad had taught him when he was very young. When he says, don't show up the other team. Be a gentlemanly player. Be a professional. You're expected to play well, and don't show up the other team. And imagine that in today's world. So he didn't. I don't. He's certainly in the Detroit uniform. Never
celebrated. One thing I can tell you, maybe Mike, about Sauvé, because I saw this in a lot of goalies back then. Most goalies did not have multi-year deals, and that was probably one of those things where he had the signed contract in the drawer already, and that's why he went back. Like he probably knew he was going back no matter what, and this was just business, and he was going to be back there.
Well, he didn't do particularly well in Detroit, so they may not have offered him a contract, and he just went back to Buffalo as a free agent. So
maybe not. There were a lot of goalies that went back to their original franchises. A lot of them.
All right, let's get started. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Wednesday, June 15th, 2022.
I'm Anthony Majoni from Sunrise Philly Magazine.
Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
Kevin Allen, Hockey Buzz.
And I'm Michael Agello, and this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. Echo will be joining us in a moment. Let's start with this while we have Anthony on the line. The speculation out there, starting with Kevin Weeks yesterday of ESPN, and it's been furthered by Pierre LeBrun and a number of outlets, regarding John Tortorella and the Philadelphia Flyers. The report, I think, that Weeks said yesterday, Anthony, was that Tortorella and the team would talk either today or tomorrow. And I mean, obviously, with the NHL, with the Stanley Cup final starting today, more than likely there won't be any
tomorrow.
news.
That was confirmed by Pierre LeBrun that the contract conversation will begin tomorrow.
Yeah. So it looks like it's going down the road, as we have talked about for 3-4 months, since
quite a while.
Vino was fired. I think this is not the right. Well, I think it's the right move based on where this team wants to go. This person joining us doesn't think it's the right move, but we'll let him talk about that. But Anthony, you start. Do you think this is the right move for the Flyers?
I think it's I definitely had, Barry Trotz, and once he became available, Bruce Cassidy higher up than John Tortorella in this circumstance. But it was very obvious that that this Cassidy situation developed late in the game, and Vegas moved super quick to go get him. And I think he fits I think Cassidy should fit in very well with the personnel they have in Vegas. So the question now comes down to, in this circumstance, what was the situation with Barry Trotz if Philadelphia has now come to that conclusion that John Tortorella is the guy that they want? Now, I would say there are some elements already that exist on the Flyer roster. Certainly, you could look at a Cam Atkinson in this case, who is certainly a Tortorella disciple. I would certainly, any of his comments about John Tortorella has always been glowing. I think a culture, one of the biggest things we've discussed certainly with Philadelphia, certainly with the struggles of the last 2 seasons beyond roster constructions, everything else, is the culture of the team and how they, when things really start, when the chips are down, things begin to fold very quickly for this hockey team.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at this from the culture, perspective, I think Tortorella is certainly, I think, a good pickup, because if the one thing he's going to make sure to have done is the team. Everything is going to be about the team and the team structure, and even his criticisms usually will be along the lines of the fact that of all players pulling their weight, and that includes star players, and that could there's a chance of ruffling a few feathers. I think Tortorella's coming in right now, if it happens, at a time where Philadelphia doesn't have what I would call star level players that they had maybe a couple years back. You don't have a Claude Giroux any longer. You don't have a Jake Voracek any longer. So I think he probably has a chance of developing that culture a little bit more easily now with this current roster. Mm-hmm. But he's got his hands full, certainly, I think, in the first year. I do think when all is said and done, if they did not get a good feeling that Barry Trotz was going to say yes, and Bruce Cassidy's already off the board, John Tortorella is probably the guy you want to bring in this circumstance.
Now, Kev, I don't agree with the direction that the Flyers are probably going in, which is I think they want to quickly reset. They don't want to go the way of the rebuild, and Tortorella is consistent with that. He's not a rebuild coach. He's, I've got some players here. Let's go in a new direction with them. Let's add a player here or there, and let's, make the playoffs and go as far as we can. But Kev, I mean, if they were going to go into a different direction, then a different coach would have made sense. But this sounds like the coach that is consistent with the direction they want to go.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of coaches that are dependent upon, installing their, their style of play, their system, trying to make it better. But that's not what Tortorella is about. He can't always transform a team into a championship team. But what he's always been able to do is to take the existing team and make it far more competitive. And he's sort of the stereotype of what we always say about coaches, where, you can't make a team offensively better because that's all about talent level. But you can make any team better defensively. And Tortorella not only does that, but he takes it to another level. And it's all through accountability. Like, he expects, as Anthony says, every player to block shots, to be in his opponent's face, to give him no room, and to not allow anybody to move. And you take any team, I don't care what it is, and if they do that, they're going to be more competitive. So, and that was an issue for the Flyers last year, is that they weren't all that competitive. So I think right away he'll have an impact, because it's very simple. If you don't do that, you don't play. You don't get your minutes. You don't get the line combinations you want. And he's very firm on that. But I'll repeat what I said last time. I've talked to many, many, many players who have played for John Tortorella, and the majority of players like playing for him, because you know where you stand. You know what he wants from you. You're not guessing. He doesn't play favorites, like Anthony said again. Whether you're the star or the other player. Everybody's got to do it. We're all in. Everybody's got to get on the oar. So Mike said this was the right choice. I think it is.
I think you might be right. I've gone back and forth. Obviously, this is not my first choice. So, by the way, hello everyone from the New Jersey Aquarium. I'm at the New Jersey State Aquarium in Camden. So that's the Philly skyline across the river there. So it's the Delaware River, which famously George Washington crossed. For those of you who
a little further north of there, a little further north of here, but
a little closer to Trenton, right?
Yeah, a little closer to Trenton. Between here and Trenton, I guess. But so that's the Philly skyline. So
standing on the
pretty cool place to be today. Son's doing a little internship program today. I dropped him off for, so I had to be here. So anyway, as far as Tortorella goes, this is the one thing I want to bring up, Anthony and Russ and everyone, is it is strange for this to leak out the way it did in a situation where they don't yet have a contract with him.
I don't think it's strange, Jack. I'll tell you why. I expected there to be some sort of word, like since yesterday in the next 48 hours because of the Cup when it's going to start. I'm sure they knew Trotz wasn't coming. I also think I didn't think Trotz was my number one because I didn't think he was coming. But as far as this leaking, it makes total sense because now Flyers fans know, and then when they finally get all the T's crossed and the I's dotted, it'll be on that Cup.
And the hits have been broad, and the hits have been pretty broad across the board. Yeah. You look at John Butchergross's, not so cryptic tweet.
Right.
It's been moving in that direction.
I'm not saying that it's not going this direct. I'm not saying that he's not going to be the coach or that, but just like it is not Comcast's way to release that they've offered a guy a job that they don't have a contract with yet.
Well, I think
they didn't release that information at all. That's just
I know, but for even to let that get out in the slightest way,
I think they had to do it because, like Anthony said, with Cassidy off the board, and pretty much Trotz isn't coming.
If you know, and that's what I think it is. I think it's if they know for sure that at this point now it's not going to be Trotz, then you move quickly.
To use a canine analogy, he's marking his territory. The Flyers are marking their territory when it comes to Tortorella.
Yeah, but it really puts them in kind of a position of weakness in negotiations. It's not like the strongest thing at this point now.
They needed the coach anyhow. Where is their position of strength anyhow?
Yeah, if he comes back and says I want $5 million a year, they can still say, okay, well if things fell through, we can go someplace else.
And they've already made it well known that. And here's the thing about negotiation: they've already made it well known. It's not like there's a salary cap on coaches. Right. And if Dave Scott has already indicated the fact that the prior contract that's been given out to Alain Vigneault for over $5 million a year is not going to play a factor in what the next head coach is going to make. Why does that become then? If you really
I would love to have a business say that they were hiring me before they signed a contract with me, and I would love that to be out. I mean, I don't know. Am I wrong, Kevin?
Just check your cable bill.
Well, I mean, I think you're right from technically, but I don't think that's an issue for a corporation like the Philadelphia Flyers. So.
I don't know. I mean, I've dealt with them many times. I mean, I did a TV show with them for a while.
They're not trapped into doing this. I mean, they can just walk away.
They haven't officially said anything. It may leak, but then it's
right.
The media people are basically chess pieces in the game here.
Right.
So if it's wrong, you can say we didn't say anything. Somebody else comes in.
Deniability.
Again, we already knew Tortorella was in the city for more than a few days. Like you already know this.
I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying that there are people like that at Comcast that aren't going to be happy about it.
What you're saying, Eck, is that you're surprised that it came out before they even had a signature on paper.
Yeah,
I'm reasonably confident too. Is they have a general idea of what Tortorella was looking for. When you're at that level, it's kind of all played out. Like, Tortorella's agent has probably already let him know what kind of money. Like, I'm sure Steve Yzerman, like, for example, called around and asked, the bigger time coaches, what are you guys looking for a contract? Because, I'd heard some stories about it right off the bat. He figured, he was out on this because he didn't want to go that length of contract, or he was out on this one because of this. So I think that's kind of what they do. So I'm sure Tortorella's agent, if he has one, or he just said, look, I'll be looking for at least a 4-year deal, and I want at least $5 million a year or whatever. And so they knew going in what it is. And then, when they say they're negotiating a contract, I'll bet it's just on, bonuses or, whether or not there'll be a out clause or, those kinds of things. So.
I would honestly anticipate, and this was a conversation I had with on another show today, that I have a feeling, again, we're going to get to the contract. They're basically dotting I's and I's and crossing T's, and I wouldn't be too surprised if they make a formal announcement tomorrow night or sometime on Friday. That's where I think things are probably at right now.
No,
I think they'll do it tomorrow because Friday it'll be frowned on.
Right, because it's a Stanley Cup day.
Yeah.
Now, Anthony, you mentioned the Bruce Cassidy agreement with Vegas, and I was a little taken aback by this because I thought that Vegas
Actually,
might
Mike, I
be.
want to say one more thing about Torts because I never really got to say anything.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So the biggest thing I want to say about him today is this is a bad day for some players on the Flyers. They woke up today, and this is a bad day for them because now all of a sudden practice got harder, accountability is harder. Everything just got harder, and I do think there'll be moves based on Tortorella coming in, maybe even before he gets there fully. Like, in other words, before the season starts, because I don't think he's just going to take the same roster and try and change it all. I don't.
Yeah, and to add to that, Russ, again, I'll say what I said before is that a lot of people who interviewed for this job, one person particularly I talked to said there feels like there's a real leadership hole in this organization, and Torts will fill that hole. Like, he'll come in there and he will become the leader of this team.
Yes.
He'll become the flat out, which is something that this team hasn't really had. A strong guy who says, this is the way we're going to do it. This is my team. This is how we're going to play. This is how we're going to be. They haven't really had that since, probably Laviolette, even like,
right.
So to be honest. So this is that is big. But as far as Cassidy goes, let's switching over to Cassidy.
Well, let me just ask one quick thing to Anthony. Do you think, because we heard about the Provorov trade rumors, we heard other potential players that are on that roster that might be moved out. Do you think that Torts coming in quiets that or accelerates it?
It's tough to say because you're getting into a situation here where you've got everything sort of hinging on what they do this offseason. All hinges on the status of Ryan Ellis and where he's going to be and what role is he going to play if he is back in the lineup. Where is he at physically if he does make it back at all? And that's what they have to determine. So Tortorella is coming in here having to be aware of that fact as well, that much of whatever roster construction is going to happen is going to be determined by what exactly Ryan Ellis is.
Well, I can tell you one thing, Anthony, for sure. Torts is not going to save a spot for him. He doesn't care.
I don't anticipate it at all. Yeah.
If you're not ready today, he's out of your plans until he's ready. That's how he is.
I think he's going to see him as a bonus, to be honest, if he gets there.
Right.
Like, he's going to take it on like that. Like that'll be his way. He's like he's middle six defense.
And I do think they still want to get an idea. Like when we talk about Ivan Provorov, do I still think they want to try to get a feeling at a certain point of having the two of them there, because they did, for the very short window they had together, they did play well. The two of them, Ryan Ellis and Ivan Provorov. Yeah. So I do think they want to see that first. So it makes me probably less. Torts coming in probably comes in, makes the Provorov getting traded a little bit less. But again, everything depends on what happens with Ryan.
And while we're there, I don't want to make this whole Flyer show, but the Provorov thing is interesting because I talked to somebody the other day who said, Provorov really got kind of killed by the fact that there wasn't an Olympics. That they felt like Provorov would have gone and been a really key factor on Team Russia was going to the Olympics and there was an Olympics and all that last year. Provorov would have been a big player for that team.
You'd have been on their top pairing, no
right?
doubt.
Which and that suddenly that would have changed people's perception of him a little bit. They would have seen him play in a different kind of light. Sure. But the fact we haven't seen him play in the position he is, which is one of the best defensemen for the Russians, which is a big deal, big team. That is something I think that has lowered his status a little bit, perhaps. But Cassidy in Vegas. The really interesting thing I talked to somebody about today, which I think is fascinating. So Cassidy ends up in Vegas. Ironically, could mean Trotz ends up in Boston. Because and the crazy thing about that, is that Vegas was all in on Trotz. So that everybody was hearing, and then suddenly, Boston fires Cassidy. So then they say, okay, we'll take Cassidy. So it ends up, Boston might end up winning from losing kind of thing. We get Trotz now because.
Well, okay. The interesting thing that's been out there the last, say, 48 to 72 hours is that Trotz wants to go someplace where he has some control over the roster, not meaning he wants to be a GM or something like that, but something where he has a hand in maybe that's a symptom of being under.
I talked about this last week. I talked about this Flyers negotiation with them. I heard had a big factor in to do with that, and that was a big thing. And
I don't think Boston's his team. Then Boston's not. Ken Neely's not going to allow that.
No.
I think Winnipeg would.
Winnipeg is the team.
Yeah, Winnipeg would bow to that. Not.
Yeah, the problem with that is, let me just jump in here because we just don't see that in the NHL.
No.
Yeah.
Like this is a big deal. I talked to another GM about it, and he said, "Don't dismiss this as being lightly. We don't see that. Coach is coach, and GMs are in charge of the roster. This isn't the NFL where coaches sit around in the draft table and discuss, what's going to go on." He goes, this is, pretty different. I mean, imagine, saying that to Steve Yzerman, or to any of the top, general managers in the game. They're not going to like that.
Which makes me wonder. Which makes me wonder, if Barry's not getting that kind of a situation, does he maybe wait? Maybe does he wait then instead of getting hired now, but wait until maybe?
Can you wait when you're almost 60?
I don't know, and again, but I wonder if he's looking for that scenario, and he wants to still be on. It's if you don't get that scenario,
I don't know how. I mean, the point that somebody made is pretty accurate in the sense that, okay, Mike Babcock on his 8-year deal, no coach in this league had more of a footprint, more power than Babcock when he signed in Toronto, and he didn't get right of first refusal on roster. They brought in Lou Lamoriello just so he wouldn't bully people in the organization to do that. So that Barry Trotz can expect that, I don't know if it's reasonable.
I'll tell you the one thing I heard, and maybe Kevin knows a little, but I heard Blashill to Boston is a great possibility.
Yeah, well, I mean, he has been mentioned in several. He's gotten interviews, and he's very well liked around the league, and people think he's a very good hockey guy. And the read and the fan base of Detroit is he was atrocious. But the truth of the matter is the team isn't very good. And the other thing is he was following orders, and about how players, should be played, and preparing them, and they had a different mission. So for that reason, I think he is, getting quite. I mean, it's still going to be hard for him to get a job. I think he's, up against it. But I think teams are legitimately interested in him. But the point I was going to make, what coaches have figured out, Tortorella, Quenneville, Babcock, all three of these, is they have their say in different ways. We saw it in Chicago with Quenneville when Bowman would make a deal, and Quenneville would play him one game, and then you'd never see the guy again, and he just didn't like him.
Right.
And you see it with Tortorella. Tortorella just will make his comments about acquisitions by not playing him.
It's called the Frankie Corrado syndrome.
Yeah. Babcock did that in Detroit. Ken Holland did not like it.
Stop playing Larry Gabrick, and he was making $5 million a year.
Right.
No, he did that with Billy Lano in Detroit, and that's why he got traded to Philadelphia.
Yeah. No, there's all kinds of issues like that. Now, so I don't know. I mean, maybe Barry Trotz is just too nice a guy and just wouldn't do that because he does get along with GMs. Barry Trotz does. So maybe he just wants it, spelled out instead of doing it kind of on his own. But you can have a say if you want to. So
the last guy who really did this, if I remember right, would be Mike Keenan, right? Like he was the last GM coach. That's a while ago that I can remember at least, where he was a GM and a coach, right, for the Blues, perhaps.
Unless you consider Lamoriello when he took over as an interim after he got.
He really was always a GM, not a coach. Right. I mean, Keenan was a coach.
Yeah, Daryl Sutter, I think, was a GM coach.
In San Jose, maybe.
No, he was Calgary. Yeah.
Emil Francis was a GM coach for a while for the Rangers and a little while, I think, in St. Louis too.
Scotty Bowman in Buffalo and in Pittsburgh, and I don't think in Detroit. In Detroit, it was there was that Devellano, Nil, Yzerman, that whole group.
Yeah, that was the mess. Yeah.
That was, by the way, the ferry. By the way, that sounds sorry. There's a ferry that leaves.
I thought it was the lunch horn.
I
which
thought
I
it
did
was
not
feeding
realize.
time for the
There's a
sea
ferry right
lions.
underneath it. Yeah, that's the ferry. That's pretty funny. Sorry, I did not realize. I also set up right the beer garden counter, which I didn't realize because there's nobody here. But suddenly, like, we're seeing a few people come. Anyway, all right. So yes, there you have it. So Cassidy. So yeah, I mean, I do think there's a chance that Trotz holds out for a little bit, though. I have heard that. I mean, he wants to be in the spot that he really wants to be in. I mean, it could end up if Boston becomes insular, like I always think they will be, go with Jay Leach, which is where I kind of think the direction they would head, which is stay internal. Then Trotz gets pushed down the line a little bit further, perhaps to Winnipeg, which is the
fallback.
Which is a fallback for him. I mean, obviously, they love their Manitoban boys up there, so yeah, I mean, of course, it makes sense for him to go there.
There's a brewery that will give him beer for life if he goes there.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, he'll never buy a beer.
Brown
life.
Jug
They've said
Brown
it.
Jug Brewery. Brown Jug Brewery.
You're kidding? That's like that. Yeah, they'll win every. I mean, he'll own the town if he goes to Winnipeg. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, it was Cheveldayoff who's been a miraculous stayer for a very long time. I feel like there would be a lot of pressure on Cheveldayoff too. Like if they gave him like an assistant GM or an associate GM spot along with coach.
Yeah, but I think because of the relationship where Cheveldayoff could have been dumped by Chipman and wasn't, I think he might be willing to do that because he's lucky he has his job, and I think he probably knows that. So I think he'd be okay with that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot about Trotz that feels like it wouldn't work based on why they got rid of why they got rid of Cassidy. I mean, he's not going to play that line together all the time. Like, he's not going to put that line together. It's kind of crazy.
I think the similarities between the Winnipeg situation and the Philadelphia situation are pretty interesting because even if they do hire Trotz, there's going to be a significant changeover in that roster. I don't know whether like Scheifele could get traded, a Blake Wheeler, or there's going to be change there. And I think there's going to be change in Philadelphia. So I think, in spite of whether they bring in the big name coach or not.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we do need to get to the Stanley Cup Finals, guys. We have to talk about the finals. We are here, and we only have about 20 minutes to go. So we have made it all the way. Now we have the Tampa Bay Lightning and Colorado Avalanche. Obviously, it's going to be a fun one. This is the first time in NHL history that two teams whose name do not end with an S are playing the Stanley Cup Finals. For what it's worth, I'll throw that out there. Lightning and Avalanche. It's true.
I'm not saying it's not true. It's like what I'm talking about.
I gave it to my son. I gave it to my son, as you know, because he's always the mascot. And this is a tough one. We went a long time to try to figure out. He spent a long time trying to figure out the difference. What happens when an Avalanche faces a Lightning? Because there's a lot of different elements to it. So he ended up going with a Lightning, and this is the determination. Every year, 150 people die in avalanches. How many people do you think die every year from lightning strikes? Like about 1,500. So lightning are about 10 times more powerful than avalanches as far as, and they have a much larger territory, as he said. So the lightning are everywhere. And
it kills a lot of giraffes. Lightning does too.
They do, tons of giraffes, and I mean that's honestly the truth. You're right.
Yeah, that because they're the highest.
Yeah, they're like lightning rods sticking up there on the savannah for sure. So
right.
Well, we have to say though, I went 2-0 in the conference finals. I hit the Lightning in 6, right dead on target. I gave Edmonton too much credit for actually being able to win 2 games, which they didn't. So I think at the end of the show, we're obviously going to make our predictions, but I just wanted to pat myself on the back.
You've been very good these playoffs for sure. No question about that. So this one is this is by the way the least amount of losses we've had by 2 Stanley Cup final teams meeting in the playoffs, meaning that the Avalanche only have 2 losses so far and the Lightning only have 5.
I think call some sweeps. Thank you.
Yeah, the 2. Yeah, right. But in the first time, I think that we've seen
amazing.
Each team has had a sweep on their way there, which is interesting. We don't see that very often. There's not that many sweeps in the playoffs anymore. So.
Yeah, the funny thing is, Zach, is that so Colorado swept Nashville and they swept Edmonton, but they haven't come out unscathed because they're without their number 2 center in Kadri, probably for most of the series. They're without they're arguably their second or third best defenseman in Samuel Girard. So they lost their starting goaltender for a significant chunk. So even though they've only played 14 games, they're coming in. I mean, now they're getting Kemper back and they might get Kadri back, but they're not at 100%. Whereas now
And Cogliano's out for game one.
And Cogliano's out too. He's a role player. But, now with Point coming back, I think everybody's back for – now he's not 100%, but everybody's on hand for the Lightning.
The one statistic, too, about that I don't think gets enough play is no team in NHL history has run the kind of gauntlet that the Lightning have had to run to get to the final. And now they face another formidable opponent as well. I mean, the number of points when you add them up that each of those teams have had, it's pretty impressive. Like they've never in the first two cups, they haven't had the dust off teams like they have faced here and then thus far. So you can make an argument this is their most impressive run thus far. And also Stamkos, I wanted to make sure I was right on this, but I looked up. This is by far the best playoff he's ever had.
Oh yes.
He's been injured in some playoff runs as well, but he's not really had given the Point was out, this is probably one of his better performances because they really needed it.
His playoff I looked up the same thing too, Kev. His playoff in 2015 when they got to the Cup final against the Hawks was pretty good, but he scored key goals and he scored two goals. So he's been great, and a lot of people thought he might have been done after he was out for most of that 2020 run in the bubble when he only played the one game, but he's bounced back and had a 100-point season, so he's had a renaissance.
Well, and the other statistic that I think is really remarkable, just because of the club that he will be in, and those who have scored 25 or more points for 4 consecutive playoffs. Like the list right now includes Gretzky, Trottier, and Bossy. That's a pretty good list. And now the guy who can join that is Nikita Kucherov. So that puts him in pretty great company in terms of consistency of excellence in the postseason. So. Well,
I heard this discussed, and I want to get everybody's opinion on this because, okay, if they win, they're the first team since the Islanders of the early 80s to win 3 consecutive cups. A lot of people are comparing this team to that 83 Islanders team that beat the Oilers, how they sort of fought through, and they didn't win the typical way that they had won the previous 3 cups, that they sort of gutted it through and used their experience and everything to beat that up and coming Oilers team. But the thing is, I think this might be more impressive in the fact that the Lightning won in the bubble, won last year, without some of their key players. And then this year, when the season got back to it being like an 82-game grind, last year was 56 games, that they could win it this year in three very different ways. But I mean, that's not the challenge that the Islanders faced or the Oilers of the 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, Evan, it's really impressive that they win this series, how much they've gone through.
And 3 cups if they win, 3 cups over 21 months.
Mm-hmm.
Too. So, I mean, that's, really impressive. And, not to diminish, and I just want to add one point about the Avalanche as well, like the statistical evidence of the Colorado greatness. I don't think there's any question that Makar has been the best player that we've seen in terms of difference making. He just, in every game, he's just been so noticeable and everything else. However, I don't think we're giving McKinnon his due. 14 games and 11 goals, that's pretty impressive. And, he's just really kind of shown his importance and his shots on goal. Nobody's within 20 of them. He's got 82 shots on goal. This man is just, turning it up. And, I know a lot of people think, including myself, that Makar is the favorite to win the Conn Smythe. But Nathan and McKinnon, I think he's right there. I think it's neck and neck in terms of the Colorado contingent.
Well, the funny thing is that McKinnon may have had the goal of the playoffs, but it was undercut by the fact that his team lost after he scored it. That goal against St. Louis, I think it was game 5, where he just took the puck and did a Gilbert Perreault right down the ice, went through everybody, scored the goal. Everybody's like, oh my God. And then, of course, St. Louis tied it and then won it in overtime. that probably was the most dramatic goal, and just power, speed, everything. And then they lost the game, and now it's sort of looked at as an afterthought, even though it was a fantastic goal. But he's been incredible.
Yeah.
Really has.
And he's been just dynamic, and we did talk before about the fact this is the most stars we've seen in a series, just dynamic wise. There's no question about that. We're gonna have that. This is gonna be a fun game to watch, a fun final to watch, and live it's gonna be incredibly fast. It's gonna be fast everywhere, but it's just gonna be one of those things where you watch it. If you watch it live, the speed of this series is going to be really kind of unparalleled in a lot of ways. I do think the goaltending issue obviously a huge favorite for the Tampa Bay Lightning.
I think there's an equalizer. I think the Tampa does not have close to the speed Colorado does. They have trouble with the speed of the Rangers, and Colorado is just as fast. And then so the goaltending versus the speed. I mean, there's other handicaps that Tampa has. Tampa, at times will get tired on shifts. They will.
I do agree. I heard early in that Rangers series, right? With when the Rangers, especially in Game 1, when the Rangers really took it to Tampa, and we saw Toronto take it to Tampa too with speed.
Yeah,
I think there is a big question there, but at the end of the day, Tampa seems like they'll let you do that. They'll let you run around like that, but then they'll eventually get it under control.
But
I heard, there could be an end point for that.
Yeah.
I heard one thing today that I sort of really disagreed with, and there's Tampa is a dynamic offensive team, and so is Colorado, and this is after years of teams that are playing strictly defense or trying to shut down in the playoffs, it's going to be a seed change in the league. The two wide open offenses. Excuse me. Tampa won and got to the Stanley Cup Finals for the third year in a row, shutting down the Rangers, the Panthers, and the Leafs. They didn't go toe for toe, and Colorado did it against Edmonton because Edmonton stinks defensively, but against Nashville and against St. Louis, they played pretty good defense. So this is not teams that are one-dimensional offensive teams. These are multi-dimensional teams, and it's not just they can play wide open offense. No, they can play both.
Kevin, what are your thoughts on the series? How's it play out?
Well, I mean, it's interesting to me that I've sort of looked at what everybody is saying, and the general consensus is that Colorado is going to win, but the media seems to think that the Tampa Bay Lightning are going to win.
Yeah.
And, since I'm a media guy, I'm going to Lightning. Actually, that's not why I'm going to them. I've been impressed with them just because of the gauntlet. They, I watched them closely at the end. They were not playing well. I really thought they were headed for a bad end. But all of a sudden, no longer does, suddenly Vasilevsky looks like the Vasilevsky that's the best goalie in the league.
Yeah.
They have found a way. I mean, 8 games out of 11 where he's given up 0 or 1 goal, not 2 or few, but 0 or 1 out of the last 11 games. And, they have found a way, and their defense is always competitive. They can, and they're very opportunistic in their goal scoring and their depth. We don't give Brisebois enough credit for, the Nick Paul acquisition. He's added guys that have really helped this team, even though their depth isn't what it once was. So I love the Colorado Avalanche. Yeah. I like what's going on, but I think losing Kadri was a major loss. You lose Girard. Maybe you don't notice him against his loss against the Oilers, but I think you will against the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Because Byram sort of stepped into the gap for Girard. I'm very similar here. I'm going Tampa in 7. My philosophy here is to be the champ. You got to beat the champ, and I don't know whether they can beat the champ with Vasilevsky in goal. I mean, Kemper is coming back, but they're the second best in goal, and in every series. They even Shesterkin, as great as Shesterkin is, Vasilevsky out-goaltended him. He out-goaltended Campbell in the first round. He out-goaltended Bobrovsky in the second round, and he out-goaltended Shesterkin in the third round. So I believe he's gonna out-goaltend Kemper in this round, and I think that Tampa Bay can generate enough offense, Russ, that and probably keep Colorado in check. Now it's gonna be tough because Colorado's got a lot of speed throughout their lineup, but I just think that the Lightning are going to find a way to do it. So Tampa in 7. Go ahead.
I don't think they can keep it all in check because of Colorado's blue line. It's the most mobile blue line, even without Gerard. Devin Taves is almost a point a game, 13 points in 14 games. Byram's 7 and 14, and he doesn't even get big time power play time, if any at all. And they all can move the puck and bring it into the offensive zone and then make things happen. Tampa is going to have a hard time defending that, especially Cale Makar, as we know. I think Kemper's going to give up some goals that we don't like. But in the end, there's a lot of balanced scoring on Colorado. Landeskog is going to be a real factor in the crease because even Kreider stopped being a factor in the crease with the Rangers. But when he was, it was a big deal with Vasilevsky. And so I think Colorado has all of those elements. And I can see it going one of two ways. Like I can see it going where Colorado edges out this series and they win in 6 or 7, or I could see if Colorado gets frustrated, loses game 1, has a bad game 2, they get swept or lose in 5 because all of a sudden they're not who we thought they were. But I'm going to still go with Colorado in 7 because I do think Tampa is really in for it. They haven't faced anybody like Colorado at all.
Well, it's kind of my thinking is that they've faced teams that have elements of Colorado in them for sure. Like
elements, but not this total offensive package that they are.
I mean, I think Toronto is pretty close to Colorado offensively,
but they don't have the puck moving blue line like Colorado. Yeah. Not even close.
No, they don't. But then the Rangers do, and then
they just have a couple of guys, but not like 3.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I mean, this is definitely. There's no question. Like what Kevin said is 100% correct. That what Tampa's faced to get here is amazing, and to only lose 5 games to those teams, and on top of it, they not just win those series, but really win them pretty confidently. I mean,
a couple of them were one.
With the exception of Toronto, but for sure, but I still think that there are definitely controversial goals and things like that happen for sure. But at the end of the day, I think that I'm a firm believer in the shift from the team that we just played to the next shift, and I think that this is a much bigger shift for Colorado than it is for Tampa. I do think that Tampa at the end of the day, goaltending. I'm not a huge Kemper guy. I want to see how he does in this series. It's going to be fascinating to watch. I think that they got a bit of a break before, and I think it'll be interesting to see if he's going to be the one in the series. Like I wouldn't be shocked at all if we see both goalies in this series for Colorado, and. That being said, it's still a 7-game series. To me, it's a toss up at the end of the day. At the end of the day, 7 games. I go with Tampa's ability to shut it down. Their experience. So to me, Tampa in 7. Yep, right there. I'm with you guys. 100% agree. And that's all the time we have for today, guys. We have to cut the show short a little bit today. We apologize for that. But we'll be back again tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll have more rumor truck for you and stuff like that. Rumor stuff to talk about for sure. And
Without the buzz, it's just hockey.
Well, we can't hang up.
I know I can. I'm ending the show.
All right.
There you go.
I guess hang up.